Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video over here on my YouTube channel. I don't know why I say that every time because obviously it's my YouTube channel. Anyway, it's now August, it's the 1st of August, and therefore that means I need to do my July reading roundup. Now this is one of my favourite videos to record each month because basically I get to talk about the books I've already read. I also don't have to think too much as to new video ideas because that's an easy win, that is. I read 7 books throughout July. Quite a bit of fantasy based on what I'm looking at here. In fact, there's only one kind of thriller in here, one down-to-earth book, as it were. So there's going to be quite a lot of fantasy references in here, so if you're not a big fantasy person, please don't turn off, stick around, stay around, thank you. Watch for as long as possible if you can. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the video. Let's go. Okay, so these aren't going to be in any particular order because they never are, because I forget what order I read the books in. But the first one is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Now this is a book that I had been meaning to read for quite some time. It's a book that I've seen all over social media. It's a book that I think most people on TikTok and Instagram would know about by now because it did the viral rounds, as it were. So I decided I need to pick it up. I'm a fantasy reader, I'm a viral book reader. Having a social media platform where I talk about books all the time means I have to read these books. I don't have to, but I want to get my opinions across. Anyway, Powerless was a meh. That's my review of it. You could skip to the next book now if you want to. Powerless is about two people. Essentially, we've got Payton and we've got Kai, and it's kind of romantic-y. It starts off really strongly. There's essentially a story going on here about a young, poor girl and the prince, and they bump into each other, and then they get involved in a tournament together, and there's a romance going on at the same time. There's a lot of kind of Harry Potter Goblet of Fire going on in here, and also a little bit of Hunger Games going on in here. And it started off, as I said, quite strong. I was really interested in characters, I was interested in the world, I was interested in where it was going. And then it kind of moved over to the romance side of things a little bit too much. It forgot where it was going with the plot, really, and every time Roberts could, she focused on trying to make the two characters flirt with each other and get closer to each other and tease each other, and I just kind of started to lose interest a bit there. That's my general synopsis of it, though at the end there is a moment that shocked me. So often with these books, there's kind of a moment where you think, all right, it's getting to the end, you're like, nothing's really happening, but there's a really big moment and kind of bigger world plot changing as well, and that's what I like in a fantasy book. I like to know what I'm reading is important in the bigger grand scheme of things, which is the problem with Akator, because most of that book is just about the two characters, and it's like, well, what is actually happening out there? What's going on? How is what you're doing, what you're saying, affecting anybody else? It's not. But with this, there is a moment at the end where things start to change. The two main characters, I don't want to spoil it, but essentially very, very good. Now, the general book, not great. The ending, much better, vastly improved. So it's basically a book that is bookended by a great start and a great finish, and some very boring romance in the middle. Now, I have picked up the sequel. I'm trying to look for it down here somewhere. It's somewhere over there, I can't find it. But I have picked up the sequel to this, which I think is called Reckless. Now, the reviews of it have not been good so far. Basically, Lauren Roberts also came out on TikTok and said, yeah, this is just like a romance bit in the middle. It's leading up to book 3, and you think, why would you release a whole book that's just about the characters and no plot? And yeah, so I do want to carry on because of what happened at the end of this one, but then I've heard that and I'm like, do I want to carry on? So we'll see where I go, but that's Powerless. I'd probably give this a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book was Breaking the Dark by Lisa Jewell. Now, Lisa Jewell is one of my favourite thriller authors. Breaking the Dark is her first foray into the Marvel universe. Now, Marvel is having a horrible time at the moment. Basically, everything they released is awful. It's all a little bit woke and not focusing on actual plot and characters and trying to introduce new things into the universe that don't make sense and contradicting things that happened in the previous films and movies and TV shows. Films and movies are the same thing. But Breaking the Dark is a completely different story. This is about Jessica Jones. Basically, what Lisa Jewell is doing here, she's writing a Jessica Jones novel that's kind of a thriller. So Jessica Jones, if you don't know her character, is a detective in the Marvel world. She does have kind of superpowers. She's quite strong. She's quite quick. She heals quickly. These sort of things, but nothing that sexy in terms of a superpower. And in fact, there's only one point throughout this whole book. Actually, there might be 2 points throughout the whole book where she uses these powers. So if you're a Lisa Jewell fan and you thought, well, I'm not that bothered about that because it's just going to be all superhero-y, it's not at all in any sense of the word. It really didn't feel like a superhero book. What happens is Jessica Jones is essentially approached by a person, I think she kind of previously knows her, there's an element of this, she previously knows her. This person's children went off to London for the summer and have come back and their skin's perfect and they're not bothered about being on their phone anymore and they keep saying the word perfect and they've changed. They've become very, very vain and very, very dull as human beings. So basically she's like, Jessica, go check out what's going on in London, what's happened. So Jessica does, she finds out what's happening. And then there's a whole big thing that goes on. Unfortunately, it really never got going for me. It never really hit the pace that especially a superhero book should, or a Lisa Jewell book should, where I was like, plot twist, plot twist, plot twist. None of that really happened. The big theme in the book, and I don't want this to spoil it too much for you, but is around kind of social media vanity and the filters on social media, which I think, one, is a little bit outdated. I think everybody's very much self-aware now that social media isn't always real. This perfect picture of this toned person in this gorgeous place that they're in is not their everyday life. They may not even be happy in their life when they're taking that picture. I think we're aware of that, but this book pushes that idea and pushes the idea that especially very young people are looking at social media and thinking, I want to be like that, rather than thinking they should be like themselves, especially looks-wise. And they all think they should be blonde, blue eyes, white teeth, that sort of thing. So that's a big message in here. Unfortunately, as I said, the pacing was just a little bit off for me. There wasn't enough kind of going on. There are meant to be 2 more books coming out in this kind of series, as it were. So this is Jessica Jones, and we've also got a Luke Cage and a Daredevil. So if you don't know, they're part of a group of people, I can't remember what they're called, but they're kind of like how you've got the Avengers. They've got their own little group there. They're going to be written by different authors, not Lisa Jewell. I might pick those up still because I like the idea of there being a collection of things. And if they're related, so like if this Jessica Jones story is referenced in the Luke Cage story, that would be interesting, but they might be completely different. I don't know. Again, I would unfortunately probably have to give this a 3 out of 5. It just really underwhelmed me, unfortunately. It's not a hit on Lisa Jewell. It's not a hit on her attempt or suggesting that it's a poor attempt at Marvel. I just think there was an element probably of a pressure of, right, I want to write a good Marvel book rather than I'm just going to write a Lisa Jewell book and it's going to have Jessica Jones as the main character. So I think if she'd focused on that, it may have done better. But yeah, unfortunately, 3 out of 5 for me. Next up is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. Now, I'd seen a lot about this. You can see this is now, if you consider Breaking the Dark fantasy, then this is kind of my second fantasy. Well, no, Powerless was fantasy, so it could be my third. I think Breaking the Dark's more thriller. Anyway, fantasy. Mark Lawrence is a big name in the fantasy world. It's my first Mark Lawrence book. I'll be honest, this was very difficult to get into. I'd heard some very good things about it. I'd heard it was really well written. And you can write things really well and also make them approachable at the same time. And unfortunately, this wasn't particularly approachable. I was listening, as I do, a lot to this book, and it didn't really feel that engaging. There's also an element of the plot where it felt like it kind of jumped around. It didn't really know what it was doing. It was like, I've got this idea, and my characters are doing that thing, and you're like, but why? Like, why? There's libraries that they can jump into pools and they go into different worlds and there are different timelines and different alternative universes, but it's like, why? What's the point? What's going on? And it really, really did not ever get going until, again, at the very end. So we're seeing a theme here with these kind of books, especially with Powerless, that sort of thing. The last, I would say, 150 pages are how I want a fantasy book to be. There was battles going on, there were people dying, there were new creatures found, there was this kind of idea of this other city that everybody was fighting against, there was the villain. These things were introduced very, very late into the book. The idea of there kind of being any sort of treachery or dangerousness going on here was also brought in way too late. And unfortunately, that just meant I couldn't get into it. And I read so much of it that I got to the point where I was like, I'm just not enjoying it. Then the last few first 100 pages hit and things picked up. And I don't know really. There's a sequel to this. I'm not sure if it's out yet or if it's coming out. I don't know whether I'll be picking it up. I've really got to be convinced. I've really got people to say to me, if you didn't enjoy the first book, you will enjoy the second book because it's all about the plot and all about the action. Then I'll be more into it. But other than that, again, I think we're probably looking at a 3 to 4 star here. I think it's way better written than Powerless. I think there's a lot more potential with this one. And there's not kind of any sort of cheap romantasy. There is romance in it, but it's kind of like quite a mature romance where they're just there with each other, experiencing each other, rather than it being this teasing, flirting, bantery sort of cringe that sometimes books can put into them. I'll see, as I said, whether I read the sequel based on if other people think it's good or not. So yeah, maybe a 3 or a 4 for The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. So the next book I read was Never Lie by Freida McFadden. Now this is kind of my second thriller of the month and is the last I'm going to be talking about. Freida McFadden is just becoming one of those authors for me that I love to pick up in between big, long, difficult reads. I think I picked this up after The Book That Wouldn't Burn. It was a very difficult book to kind of keep engaged with, and I thought I just need this short, little, snappy thriller from Freida McFadden, and that's exactly what I got with Never Lie. So Never Lie is about Trisha and Ethan, and essentially what I think happens is they go to a house that they're hoping to buy. It's very remote, it's very large, it's on for a great price, and they're like, why? It's very well known that a doctor that used to live there was killed there, apparently by her boyfriend at the time. Trisha, who is Trisha and Ethan, finds these tapes of the doctor, and she essentially used to work as a psychiatrist supporting patients and finds these tapes talking about the previous patients. She then starts to unravel this kind of idea of, okay, maybe it wasn't the boyfriend that killed her, and the house starts to move around her, not the house, but things start to happen in the house, and she says to her boyfriend, like, what's going on, why can we not, what's going on here, I don't know what's going on, help me, blah, blah, and things then kind of rapidly speed up. Now, it's not the best thriller in the world, it's not going to blow your mind. If your only genre is thriller, you'll enjoy it though. If you have experienced historical fiction, fantasy, I don't know, contemporary fiction, romance, other genres as well, this isn't going to be up there with the best books you've ever read. But as I said, if you're a thriller reader, solid read. All Freida McFaddens have got the perfect kind of chemical balance of short chapters, quick pace, genuinely interesting characters, and a twist in here that I thought was quite clever. My partner read the book before me and she said, yeah, I wasn't that impressed, I didn't really get it, I don't really care for it. But I thought the twist was quite clever. You might work it out quite early on because, I don't want to give a reason out why, but not quite early on, but you'll probably work it out before the book reveals it, as it were. Freida McFadden, as I always say, is one of those people that I love to just pick up in between, and this is part of my ongoing, okay, I've read a load of Freida McFadden books, here's my thoughts thing that I'm going to kind of do with a video at some point, because I know Freida McFadden's one of the biggest names in thrillers at the moment. Not necessarily the best or the greatest written books, but you can always guarantee a good, fun little read with these books. So, Never Lie by Freida McFadden, I'd probably give a 3 or a 4 out of 5 stars for this because it was fine. It wasn't the most shocking thing. It's just a fun, easy read that I'd recommend if you're a thriller fan. Next up is Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Now, this might just be one of my books of the year. It was absolutely fantastic. This was actually my July follower pick of the month. So this is the book that I had chosen to read in July because you guys said I should definitely be reading it in 2024. This is a book about a man called Ryland Grace who wakes up on a spaceship in the middle of space, has no idea why, where he is, what his purpose is, why some of his crewmates are dead, etc. Through kind of flashbacks, which we experienced at the same time as him, because obviously that's how you read a book, he starts to work out, it kind of leads timeline-wise up to where he is now. And he works out, essentially, he's been sent up there to save planet Earth. I don't want to reveal too much more in there because a part of what he's trying to save them from is a massive part of the plot. This is one of those rare books where the audiobook is almost a better experience than reading the book. Now, if you're going to read it, it's just as fantastic as listening to it. But the audiobook was fantastic. It was so, so good. I can't remember the name of the narrator off the top of my head, but he was really, really brilliant. I'll pop his name just down here so you can check him out because really, really was engaging in terms of the way he portrayed Ryland Grace, who has a lot of comedy in him, the way that Andy Weir wrote the whole book, and there is a layer of comedy throughout the whole thing. Yes, we're in this kind of dire situation, but also, why can't we have a joke? Why can't the characters just think of life as a little bit more relaxing than your big thrillers and your big scary things that we've already read in some of the fantasy books? So it was a really, really enjoyable book, and there's a lot of like bigger questions going on in here, and there's a lot of big moments in this that you think is really, really clever. One of my small gripes was that this is a very science-heavy book. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of scientific terms in here, a lot of kind of chemicals and elements and logic that if you don't know science, and I'm not just talking about basic science, I'm talking about like high-level science, you just got to kind of go along with it. You just got to kind of be like, okay, sure, if that's what you say, I'll go along with it. And so there was an element of that where they just kind of scienced their way out of a lot of the worst problems, which created a little bit of disbelief for me, and also started to make me feel a little bit like, okay, this situation he finds himself in, where he's just in the middle of space, has no idea what to do, doesn't feel that treacherous anymore, because they just keep working it out. But there we go. That's my kind of overall thoughts on it. Its pacing is fantastic. He never wastes a word, does Andy Weir. There's no part of this where it's kind of like, oh, I'm just going to like fill the world for a bit or fill some characters for a bit. Absolutely not. Every single word in here is either funny, is either poignant, it's either plot, is either speech, is something worth reading or listening to. And as I said, I would 1,000,000% recommend, if you've got any interest in audiobooks at all, listening to this, because it really, really was fantastic. One of my favourite books of the year so far. That's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. The next book is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Now, this is without a doubt, again, one of my books of the year. I so adore Brandon Sanderson, and I'd forgotten how much I adore his writing. Now, you can see I've actually read this one. I don't know if you can see the cracks in the spine, but I've actually read this one because some people comment going, your books look so pristine. How can you call yourself a reader if you're not actually reading the books? Audiobooks. But anyway, I did listen to most of it on an audiobook. But Well of Ascension is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy. Now, there are some more Mistborn books in this kind of world. I think it's called the there's a word I cannot pronounce, but he's got more books in it, but this is the first trilogy. Now, this is the series that everybody, or the trilogy that everybody recommends if you're going to get into Brandon Sanderson, to try this one first, because it's the most approachable. The world's not quite as big, there's not quite as many characters. You've only kind of got one main character who you follow the point of view, whereas with the Stormlight Archive, you've got, I think, 3 and possibly up to 4 at some points as well. This one focuses on Vin. Now, I don't want to spoil what happens in the first book, but essentially there's a life-changing event or world-changing event that happens in the first book. And what then happens is this follows on quite quickly after that. And it deals with the reaction and what the main characters need to do politically as a result of what happens in the first book. Now, if you've read the first book, you know what I mean. If you've read this book, you very much know what I mean. What's so approachable about Brandon Sanderson's writing is kind of, I say what is, but what are so many things. One, it's just not overly written. There isn't a load of kind of over-exuberant language in here. There isn't a load of talking for the sake of talking or describing for the sake of describing. Yes, there are elements in it where the characters have conversations about history, but that's far more engaging than the book just describing the history to you. At no point does the book just kind of sit there for a couple of pages and read out everything about some past. There are teeny tiny little kind of one-liners at the end and at the start of some of the chapters, as you can see here, which give you a little bit of backstory and a little bit of world and a little bit of peek into some grander things going on as well if you want them. But other than that, there's no kind of massive exposition here that you need to worry about. Brandon Sanderson's writing is so open, so approachable. It makes you feel cool when you're reading it as well. Like, he has absolutely no qualms about writing just this really cool scene where he's talking about like flips and slides and cool sword actions and use of magic and all sorts of stuff. Speaking of magic, this is probably the best magic system in any sort of series in terms of logic. So what it essentially uses is it uses metals, and the metals give you certain abilities. Now, only certain people can use these metals, and those that can't actually are poisoned by them, but they essentially eat them, and then they get certain abilities. So they can see in the dark, or they can push things, or they can pull things, or they can jump high, or they grow in strength, these sort of things, and then they can combine them to combine those powers. So for example, if you wanted to throw someone up in the air, you'd probably, I don't know, push, but then pull, I don't know, something like that. You'd pull them towards you and push, etc. Vin is something called a Mistborn. So what you have is you have characters in here who can only use certain metals, whereas Vin can use all of them, and so she's a Mistborn. She's then considered one of the most powerful Mistborns because of what happens in the first book. But it's just cool, it's just fun. It is long, but it never felt long, and it never felt like I wanted to get to the end. And that's the other thing with Brandon Sanderson books, is the amount of times I read a book that's 500, 600, 700 pages long, and I just want to get to the end because I want to be able to start on another book, or I don't know, I just want to get to the end because I want to see what the ending's got for me. But with this, I was just happy sitting in there, reading the book and like listening to it, and being part of the world again, and that is exactly what Brandon Sanderson does. So whether this will be on my books of the year at the end of the year, I don't know, just because it's the second in the series. It might not be the best in the series. It's not the introduction to the series. I don't know, but it really, really reminded me how much I love Brandon Sanderson, and it's really, really reminded me that I want to read The Rhythm of War, which is the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive, before the 5th book comes out later this year. But that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. We're talking 4.5 stars, easy here. And then finally is another fancy, and this is God Killer by Hannah Craner. I think it's Hannah Kaner. Now this is a book that was recommended to me again. So again, big bookshelf sat to this way. You can see the kind of corner here. That's a big bookshelf. Well, half a bookshelf height-wise anyway. Filled with books I need to read. I showed people a bunch of them and they said, where should I start? This was also one of my books that was on that TBR pile list that you will have seen in one of my previous videos about my realistic 2024 TBR. God Killer is about Kissen, who is essentially a god killer. It also follows the story of a couple of other characters, Geddy, and I'm trying to find the other ones. I think her name's Inara or something like that, and also Elo, who's Elogast. So there's 4 characters, one of whom is actually a god. So there's a little plot twist or a little moment in it where it's like, oh, okay, I thought she was killing gods. Yeah, but why is she not killing this one? We'll see. This follows Kissen as she finds Inahara, and basically she is attached to this god and she wants to try and help her and try and save her and all this sort of stuff. It's a very short book. Now, I say very short. It's short for a fantasy. Usually with your fantasies, you're looking at minimum 400-500 pages. This one is it's under 300 technically, which is really, really interesting for a fantasy. And it didn't feel that short. It didn't feel that long. It felt about right. Now, it does feel very much like an introduction book to a series. It feels like Hannah had an idea, just first name the author there. Kaner had an idea, and she was like, yeah, I'm going to write about this, see how that goes, and we'll see how that goes. And it went really well. There were elements of it that felt a little bit Witcher-esque. She kind of takes money for killing gods and then goes off and does this thing, but the whole Witcher element kind of fizzled out quite early on when she realised, okay, I'm not going to be doing any other more commission work. I've got to fix this one person. Then there's a bigger story that starts to unfold as well later on, and there's other gods involved and villains and revenge and things like this, and then the finale is quite dramatic and yeah, it's quite good. Unfortunately, the middle for me, I kind of lost track a little bit. I don't know whether it was because, again, I listened to it and sometimes that can unengage you to the story a little bit, or whether there was just kind of too much. There's kind of a lot of travelling in this, and I struggle with books where there's travelling. The point of the travelling is that you're there to kind of get to understand the characters better and get to like them more or less, etc. And I just didn't really do that with this. There is kind of a romance in here as well, a little bit, so if you are into a bit of romanticy, you might like this book. In fact, it does get, I wouldn't say smutty at any point, but there is a moment where there is naughty words discussed and naughty words happen and naughty things happen. So if you're into that sort of thing in your fantasy books, there's a little bit of that in this. Not enough probably to fulfill your needs, but there we go. So that's God Killer by Hannah Kaner. It's a good fantasy book. I know there's a sequel. I don't know whether when the sequel's coming out. It just sort of said something in the back here, I don't know, but I know there's a 3rd book announced, so the sequel must be out to this one. Anyway, I'd probably give this a 4 out of 5 star. So that's God Killer by Hannah Kaner. So here are all of the books that I read throughout July. There's 7 of them, and they were all okay to fantastic. So in terms of order of my kind of least to most favourite, we're probably looking least favourite is Powerless, then Breaking the Dark, then possibly Never Lie, The Book That Wouldn't Burn, God Killer, Well of Ascension, and then Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I don't know whether that's the same order that I just suggested over the past 25 minutes or so is the best kind of order to put them in, but either way, these are the 7 books that I read throughout the month. Let me know if you've read any of them. Let me know whether you liked any of them. Let me know if I've read such and such, I should go read such and such, or let me know down below if you disagree with my opinion on anything, because that's allowed. I mean, say it nicely. Don't be like, yo, what the hell? That's awful. You are wrong. You're absolute moron. You could say that, to be fair, because now I know you just said it ironically. But anyway, I hope you're enjoying your reading at the moment. I'm going to go get some lunch because my tummy just rumbled so loudly. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like, please subscribe. I will see you in the next video, and goodbye.